So we'll just quickly go over like who we are. Joe?
Yeah, so at the company, I'm the biz guy. So that basically means I run all the production management, I handle all the contracts, all the budgeting, all the spreadsheets, all that.
So
really,
many spreadsheets.
all the fun stuff, like all that sort of stuff.
And then I am the creative one. Yeah, well, sort of, yeah. I get to do level designing. I work pretty closely with everyone in the team and make sure we maintain the game's direction. And I also really like face swapping. So if you end up following me on Twitter, I apologize, but not really. Get used to it. I think they're hilarious. And so that's a really nice picture of us when we got our Harmonious t-shirts for PAX. So that was pretty exciting. Perfect op for a face swap. So who is Harmonious Games?
So yeah, as Laura said before, we started out at the start of this year. We were founded in February of 2016. And we're a bunch of new grads from Melbourne University. There were 7 of us in total at the time. There's now 6 of us. We'll go into that a little bit later on. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that's like, where you're going from university out into the big wide world and what it's like to actually start doing your own thing and everything that involves.
Mm-hmm. And our company goal is basically to make games that can promote cooperation, that force people to communicate and have a good time doing it. So that's kind of what we're about. Let's move on. So what are we working on right now? We're working on a game called Putty Pals, and Putty Pals is a couch co-op 2D platformer where you about quirky putty friends who are swept away from their home and plopped into like dangerous locations. And in order to get home, they have to use their special putty abilities as a team. So we're releasing on Steam in early 2017 at this point, and hopefully consoles soon after. So
throughout this year so far, we've done a few things right, but also done a whole bunch of things wrong.
A lot of things wrong.
Yeah, so when we were preparing for this talk, we kind of sat down together and spent a good couple of hours over a couple of coffees just making a list of all the things we thought we did right and all the things we did wrong. Funnily enough, the list of things we did wrong was much longer than the list of things we did right.
A lot longer.
Yeah.
It was actually pretty fun to do because we sat down and we were like, let's write this list. And all we kept doing was thinking of all these negative things, like, oh yeah, of course, that thing. Yeah, we should put that down too. Oh, and do you remember that time that, yeah, okay. And then we looked down and we were like, oh my God, write something positive. What did we do right? Quick, oh, we did that. Oh yeah, we did do that. And it's kind of a weird experience to think about now because it's been a very rapid year for us. And everything's happened very quickly that we hadn't really sat down and done this. It was kind of nice. Thanks, Liam, for forcing us to do that.
Being able to self-reflect is a very useful skill to have. And that's something we learned from this process.
Yes, we are learning all the time, especially after Rami's talk, so thanks for that. I'm sure we're going to ask some terrible questions in our slide. So after we wrote this list, we kind of thought, all right, let's break it down and see what those main areas are that we had trouble with or that we did right. And for us, the first one is, are you making a business or are you just making a game? And we'll get into that later. The second thing is friends plus business. Is that really a good mix or is it, we'll get into that later. And uni project versus a real project, something that you're making for commercial release. It's a really different thing. And team size, which was a kind of a surprising point for us. We didn't realize that was such a big deal, but it kind of is. And we'll talk about why that was for us in a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm actually really glad we didn't know what Rami was going to talk about when we wrote our talk.
Oh, yeah.
And it really leads in very well.
Yeah,
so basically, in terms of asking good questions, these are basically the 4 things you need to ask yourself before you start a company, and being able to frame them and ask them properly, and then being able to answer them properly is what is going to set you on a good path for the rest of it. And that's what we're going to go into now.
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, are you making a business or are you making a game? And so what do we mean by that? So basically, what we mean by making a business is you're investing in the long term. You're looking at a company who's going to be working on multiple projects. You're hopefully going to be supporting yourself at some time in the future from this company, all that sort of stuff. And then when we're talking about a game, it's more like a portfolio piece, something that you're going to work with like a bunch of other people just to add more things to your portfolio, hopefully get a job at another company in the future kind of thing. Also, another thing about running a business is you have to get used to being in spreadsheets a lot of the time. It's a very valuable skill to have.
That's what Joe wishes his spreadsheets looked like.
Yeah.
They don't look like that.
It's a lot more fun. Yeah.
All right, next slide. There you go.
So what did we do? So the reason why we're saying you need to ask yourselves this question is because we didn't. So basically, we set out to make a portfolio piece. We're like, hey, let's just work together for a couple of months, polish up this game that we took to PAX, and then just release it into the wide world, and then just move on and like go about our separate ways, basically. And then it was only through the initial couple of months where we started having conversations with people, especially from the GDAA and all that sort of stuff, where we kind of worked out that, hey, we could turn this into something that we do in the long term. So we ended up just stumbling into creating this business. And that's led to probably a lot of the mistakes that we've made so far, because we didn't think about the long term when we were making those initial decisions about everything else we're going to talk about in a little bit. Another point I want to raise is if you're starting a business, you have to have somebody who's actually interested in that side of things. You really don't want somebody who's just a programmer sitting down and doing the budgeting or all the spreadsheets and all the production work and all that sort of stuff. Like, it's almost like half of what you have to do. So you have to have somebody who's actually like, interested in doing that. Otherwise, it just becomes way too boring.
Luckily for us, Joe put his hand up right at the start of us starting this company and was like, yeah, I'm pretty interested in the business stuff. Yeah, I'm sure I could handle it. Yeah. And then now, like all this time later, he like spends almost like 80%, I would say, of your time doing business-related stuff, budgeting, emails, so many emails, and just a whole bunch of other stuff as well. And it's really lucky that we had Joe and that he was ready to take on that responsibility, because I'm not sure how we would have survived going through that process without someone who was taking the initiative to find out everything they needed to know to make the business run. Because that's pretty scary, especially when you come out of uni and the courses that we did, we had no business experience whatsoever.
Yeah, I spent 5 years learning to be a computer scientist. Not much business management courses.
No. And I've done like a drama degree, I've done psychology and game design and like, creative one. So the next thing on our list was this whole like mixing friends and business, and is it a good mix? You know what, I'm still figuring that out. As Rami was saying before, you and your business partner don't get along that well. And it's something interesting to think about, because when we started this company, we were all like such great friends and like, it'd be easy, right? Like, we're just gonna get an ABN and slap on a name for this company and Bob's your uncle kind of thing. Not so much. It's actually really difficult. Just because you worked really well together at uni doesn't mean that that's gonna translate well into a business, particularly because when you start running your own business, there's so much more weight to it. There's so much more responsibility that comes with that. And differing levels of maturity and responsibility is something that's really hard to balance. And it's something that you don't really learn about someone until there is something that's super important that you have to take care of, that you suddenly got this responsibility for. And that was really difficult for us to learn, especially for Joe and I, because we're kind of at the highest point of the hierarchy, and we kind of stumbled into that, and now we're having to kind of like step up and take on this role and this responsibility. And sometimes it's difficult for us when we see that other people in the team aren't approaching it with the same kind of level of maturity or responsibility, and kind of learning to work out how to balance that is really tricky. It's, you know, I can't answer that question for you. I can only kind of tell you about our own experiences with it. But I wish that we'd sort of thought about it more before we just dive straight into making a company, because it's really important that you'll know exactly who each other are when you start the business, and you know what each other are about and what you want. So the next slide, this is like legit what Joe and I are like at work. Joe's all like, spreadsheets and business and programming, and then I'm just like, Joe, we should go to this event, or like, when's this feature coming in? How much time do I have to play with this level that I'm doing? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, so like going back to what Laura was talking about before, it's because like picking who you start your company with is really important, because it's not that different to marrying somebody.
So we think.
Yeah, well, we assume.
We're not married.
But what I mean by this is you're going to be spending 40 hours a week with these people. You're going to like go through the highs and the lows of the company with them. You have to be able to like learn to trust them, like be able to have fun, but also be serious. Like it's what like building a relationship is about. And like, being able to do that properly is, a good groundwork for the whole company.
Yeah, it's crucial to learn to be honest with who you're working with. It's really important, and Rami sort of touched on this earlier, and it's for your own like mental health and stability to be able to rely on the people that you're working with, the people that you're seeing like every day or talking to even when you get home. Like you see those Slack notifications and you're like, oh man, it's still going. But you need to make sure that you're all completely comfortable with being honest, even when that's hard sometimes, or you disagree, or it's something that's really upsetting you. Just make sure you're honest. It's something that we've got better at. We weren't so good at it in the beginning, and we would keep things hidden for a while, and you'd kind of tiptoe around people like, oh, I want to say something, but I don't. Or like, they said something that I feel like I should say something back to, but you feel a bit weird about it. And it sort of does come back to this thing of you start as friends, and weirdly enough, you think that as friends you are honest with each other, that you are comfortable with each other. But as soon as things have weight, it just changes things. It makes things so much harder to say what you want to say. Practice being honest. I don't know how you practice that, but just, I don't know, get better at it, because it took us a while. Once you sort of start doing that, you learn what each other's strengths and weaknesses are. And that's really important too. Like, Joe and I are pretty different people, totally different. But it works because we balance each other out, and I acknowledge when Joe is better at something than I am, and I ask him for advice, or, vice versa. Find people that complement those strengths and weaknesses in yourself and in each other, because you'll make a better team for it. And also, make sure you have similar business goals when you start the company, because you laugh, but sometimes people have their own version of what that business goal is, and then whenever you have a serious meeting about something that you need to plan 6 months down the line, that's, budgeting or whatever it is, you'll get, 5 or 6 different opinions of what that should be based on their own perception of what the business goal is or what the company goal is. So many round the table conversations before we were like, okay, no, let's sit down, let's really work this out, let's find that common goal for all of us and make sure that we stick to that. So that's what we did. Yeah.
It took us a while to get there, but it's important.
Have a business goal.
Yeah, so moving on to the whole university project versus real project. So basically, why we think you should ask yourselves this question is, again, because we didn't. We'd spent 12 months working on Putty Pals. We were in love with the project, and that kind of blinded us to a lot of the reasons why maybe that wasn't the best decision to work on that as our first commercial product. And this is because making a game for university is, I can't stress this enough, so different to a broader market. Our original goal for Putty Pals was to make a game that played well at PAX Australia, and that was our sole goal, was just making a fun, bright, colourful experience that would just work really well in a convention environment. And then when you move into commercial, no, you're making a product that needs to be able to be marketable, needs to sell well, all this sort of stuff. So yeah, we've ended up making a game that's for a niche market because it's a cooperative platformer. So in essence, you need somebody else to play with. There's no online multiplayer. You need somebody with 2 controllers. It's just like there's a whole list of reasons why it will sell. It's going to be hard to sell to people. And this is one of the things you have to like really think about because it's a mistake that we may have made. We don't know yet, but yeah, you really have to think about it. And yeah, like as I said, like is just because you spent so much time working on this product, you need to be able to let go and just move on to something else. Because like when you've worked on something at university, you have a lot of emotional baggage with it as well. Like people get too attached to certain features or certain pieces of content that were appropriate for the project at the time. But then when you completely change the brief and scope, maybe those decisions or those, they don't lend themselves to moving on to an actual product. Yeah.
And that's hard. It was really hard for us to sort of think about, because like Rami said, like thinking about things in hindsight, it's like, yeah, maybe that would have been a good idea, but I wouldn't have learnt all this stuff that I've learnt now. Like, we didn't realize, we had some idea of marketing and that it's important, but like, we didn't really, and we didn't think about it. So when we committed to making Putty Pals a commercial release, it didn't really cross our minds at all that we should be thinking about our marketing plan or our marketing strategy then, like right then and there when we started making it for commercial release. And because we didn't, like, somewhere down the line we were like, oh shit, like, what do we do? Like, how do we promote this? Like, what kind of market are we in right now? Like, how do we even reach that market? And they're all questions that we're still trying to learn the answers to. And we're lucky enough to have a bunch of people around to ask. But it's one of those things that, man, I wish we had a thought about marketing so much sooner. Yeah. It's really important. Team size. This is that thing I was talking about before, where you think it's not that big of a deal. I don't know, because you think like when you're at uni, everyone's got their role that they're doing in the team and it works, and somehow it just, I don't know, you get your shit done and it works, and you think that's a good thing. But we started as a team of 9 actually at university, which is quite large. But at the time, we were like, yeah, 5 programmers, like some artists and designers are gonna nail this, it'll be fine, like that's great. More people, more manpower. It doesn't really work like that. And when we started the company in February of this year, we dropped down to 7, and we all agreed that we would set up the company, have equal shares and all this kind of stuff, which is something you should really think about. And 2 months later, one of our team members decided she didn't want to be a part of it anymore. And that was rough. Like, we'd all signed this thing and we'd gone ahead. And then we suddenly were faced with this thing of like, okay, how do we deal with someone who has shares and they're leaving now? Like, what happens to the shares? Like, what contracts do we need to do? All this kind of stuff. And even when we dropped from 7 to 6, we were still one of the largest teams in the arcade. And it's like, what? Like, we just left university and now we're still, like, we're one of the biggest studios. It's bizarre. But like I said, at the time, you think it's going to work, you think it's exciting because you've started your company and everything. You don't sort of start thinking about these until it's much later, and we were kind of wrong in that. And these are kinds of the reasons that we think that for us, our team size has made things a little bit difficult. Only some of us are doing full-time, and the others are kind of part-time, working when they can. And it makes the communication that much harder because you're trying to keep on top of everything while some people are only in for this amount of time and then others are there the entire time. And managing that is exhausting, and it's often our roles to do that. And sometimes you're just like, oh, man, if we were like 3 people, this would be so much easier. So just think about it. It does make things hard. You think that it's going to make things easier, but it really doesn't. And it also just costs so much more money, like so much more money. Like we have to think about who can we send to events and why. We can't send the entire team because it's way too expensive, right? The conferences are expensive. GDC is like...
Yep.
Talk about that later. But it's really expensive, and so you have to start thinking about, okay, well, who should go to that and who shouldn't and why, and then dealing with that as a team with your friends and having to be like, you can't come to this conference because A, we can't afford it, and B, you're not needed there, or you won't be the best representative of the company if you are there. And that's really difficult to tell someone, and it's really difficult to accept if you're not that person who should be there. So think about that too. It's difficult. And like I said before, you think heaps of manpower, like you can just smash everything out, you could put more features in because you've got more people to work on it. But often that ends up being more bugs, more like time spent making these extra things when you could be spent making what you have really, really, really good. And that's something we've learnt is like cut features, don't add them. Even if that bug is really cool and it should be a feature, probably not a good idea to put it in. So that's a bit about team size from our experience. I know that it's probably different for everyone in the industry, but that's what it's been like for us. So size matters. Just kidding. So I'm sorry, I had to.
It's all right, Laura.
So basically, from everything that we've just spoken about, we're going to give you like our advice based on our own personal experience. So take it with a bit of salt. That's the grain of salt? That's the saying, isn't it? Yeah, whatever. Just, this is from our own personal experience. And like Rami said, everyone's experience is going to be different. So
asking for help and finding a mentor. I think this is probably arguably the thing we did the best when we started up our company. Before day one, we started having meetings with people from the GDAA. We met with Samurai Punk, who are our old tutors at Swinburne.
Screen Sheet. You guys know Screen Sheet?
Yeah. So the makers behind that. I'm like, well, they've done it before, so we should go talk to them. So we were talking to them about what it was like starting a company the previous year.
And it was funny because that meeting, we sat down with them and we had like our books ready. Like we were so... It's funny to think about now. It was only like 8 months ago, but I feel like I was a child in those meetings because like we went in and we're like sitting down and we're just like ready to write down all these things. And Nick and Winston were just like, this is what we did wrong, this is what we did wrong, this is what we did wrong, don't do that, don't do this. And we were like, what? But it's super useful and really important to ask.
Yeah. And the arcade as well. Making use of that, even if you can't get a space in there or whatever, but just making an effort to reach out to people in there, just like, it's such a concentrated area of like just experience and knowledge and advice. Like if you're in Melbourne, it's silly not to make use of it.
Yeah.
We wouldn't still be a company if we weren't as involved with the arcade as we are. Like they've helped us. We made a whole bunch of mistakes. That list would have been like 5 times as long if it wasn't for all the advice we received from everyone in the arcade. Try and meet with people in there. Like I'm sure Liam would be able to tell you how to go about that.
It's amazing because even if you can't meet at the arcade, there's still IGDAM nights and that sort of thing that you can go to. And the best thing about the development community in Melbourne is that everyone is super willing to help you and they want to see you succeed. Because if you guys succeed and if we succeed, it just makes the Melbourne or Australian video game industry that much better. So everyone's like super ready to give you advice if you just reach out and ask.
Yeah, the Melbourne industry in particular is quite unique from what I hear. I don't have much experience in other ones, but the readiness that people have to just drop everything and help you out. Like I've just walked into people's offices and been like, hey, I have a spreadsheet, can you help me with it? Or, hey, I'm like struggling with production issues that we have, can you help me? And they'll just drop what they're doing and come and help you. For the most part, obviously sometimes they won't. But yeah, and just having that is, a very powerful, powerful thing. Because one of the main things that we didn't even think about, when you're starting your own company, what you're foregoing is the capacity to learn from somebody who's more experienced than you are directly. Because if you're starting in an established studio, you're going to have somebody who's your boss. and they're going to help you avoid a lot of the mistakes that we've made. And so you have to find a way to remedy that, or like replace that sort of like mentorship role, because we're the most senior people at the company and we graduated from uni last year. Like you need to like find a way to replace that, especially with the business stuff. Like as I said, I was a computer science grad. I didn't take a single business management course apart from like year 10 BizMan. You have to be able to like, the only way to learn this is from asking from people who have done it before. That's pretty much it.
Networking. I'm just going to touch on this a little bit because I know there's other talks and things about it and everyone talks about networking. But I just want to talk about it from my own personal experience. We founded the company in February, right? GDC was like 4 weeks later or something. And we started the company, went in and like had a chat with Tony Reid and he's like, yeah, you should be going to GDC. Buy a ticket now. And I was like, what? Like, what do you mean buy a GDC ticket right now? And like we sat down and looked at the cost of it all and I was like, what? And we could only afford to send one of us and we chose to send me there. And that in itself is super daunting. Like going to a conference as enormous as GDC in San Francisco, a place I've never been to before, on my own. What? So basically, to ease the pressure on me going, I kind of thought, okay, what's the best way I'm going to get the most out of this experience? And for me, it was just to make real connections with people, become friends with them, meet more people in the arcade, because we'd only been in the arcade for a couple of weeks at that point. And just make friends. Like, the temptation was always there to be like, I am this person, I'm doing this game, and I'm from Melbourne, and this is my company. You know, like that kind of thing, and that doesn't work. It's like, what? And like there were a couple of times I remember I was with Liam and we were meeting people and Liam like watched me like just word spit vomit this thing out and he's just like, what are you doing? And I was just like, I don't know. Like this is my first time doing this like properly. And you know, I got to know Liam a lot better over that period of time as well. And so he was a great support to me, as much as like other developers that I met while I was there, developers from New Zealand, from America. And because, I don't know, it just made it so much more easy to be like, you know what, I'm here with a whole bunch of other people who love games and love making games just as much as me. I'm sure that we can make real connections and be friends. And then it makes it so much easier later on to, you know, message them on Facebook or whatever and be like, hey, I'm really struggling with this thing. Can you help me out? Or can you give me some advice on what you did? And they're always like, yeah, sure, man. Like, whatever. Here you go. Like, blah, 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 blah. And it just makes things easier. So try not to schmooze too hard. Just remember that they're people first and developers second. And you'll do all right. I promise. Oh, this is me too. Yeah. Management structure. So this was something that we didn't do that well when we started the company because we're all friends, we're all equal, right? Like, easy. That's not going to make things difficult. Yes, it does. It makes things very difficult. Try and establish a hierarchy early on. Figure out who the leaders are in your team and be comfortable with who those leaders are and be comfortable with being the boss if that happens to be you. Because it's really difficult carrying that weight because you know things that the rest of the team don't. You're worrying about budget and all this like higher level stuff that everyone doesn't need to be worrying about at that time. So try and work that out early as possible because it made things so much more difficult having a democracy. You'd sit down for a meeting and then it would just go round and around and around, and then an hour later we're like, okay, cool, so we've done an hour of our meeting, let's go have lunch or whatever. And then like 2 days later I'll be like, wait, did we decide what we were supposed to decide in that meeting? And then everyone's like, I don't know, like, I thought we were going with this, and then someone else is like, no, I thought we were going with this, and I'm just like, what? Like, what's happening right now? So try and build that hierarchy, build it up so that you have people who kind of have to go, we don't have time for this, we're going with this, or, you know, the boss You need one. It's just one of those things. And listen to your friend tell you whether or not you should be working on that or this, or you should have it done by this time. It's just part of running a business, and it's necessary.
So throughout, in the middle of the year, we were lucky enough to, we applied for Film Victoria funding, and we were lucky enough to get it. And basically, the reason we think we got that is because, again, we asked heaps and heaps of people for advice, even people who had been on the panel before, and just like got them to read over it and all this sort of stuff. And in case you guys don't have access to that sort of stuff and you're applying for Film Victoria funding, we decided to give you like a short little rundown of the things we think we did right for it. And the main two things we pulled away from all the advice was remembering to sell your game. Laura and I had both just graduated from university, so we were very much so set in this academic style of writing. You're used to writing theses and papers and all this sort of stuff.
References.
Yeah, and all that sort of stuff. So when you then come to writing basically what is a marketing document for Victoria, you just give them the facts and here is the game and all that sort of stuff. And
you lack the excitement and the passion, weirdly enough. It's so bizarre. Like, you're so taught to write in this very specific way that is so disembodied from you when you're at uni. But then you have to, like, chuck that in the trash and be like, I need to write from the heart, write what you want to say about your game, write why you love it so much and why you think that people need to play it.
Yeah, it turns out you can actually use exclamation marks in text
right?
and all that sort of stuff.
We were like, you can put an exclamation mark in that?
Yeah.
What?
Like,
I can put 3?
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah, it really is. And it's something we didn't even think about. And the other thing is you need to have a solid marketing and release plan. This is another thing. I think in our original draft we made, it was maybe like a page, and the rest of it was just, oh, this is what the game is, because that's what they care about, right? No, I think basically we ended up working out about half and half, because like you can get the idea of what the game is pretty quickly in a couple of pages, but what Film Victoria really care about is, do you know how to market and do you know how to sell this game? They're going to see so many game ideas come to them, but they want to know that you have at least the idea of how you're going to go about actually making money from this thing and turning it into a product. Again, spreadsheets where we have all this money, this is how much we're spending each month, and this is when the money runs out. It seems like such a simple thing to do, but once you suddenly have this huge amount of money, we struggled with like, oh, we can just do that, we can do that, we can do that, and like, as I said, it runs out real quick.
We know the like date that the money disappears.
Yeah.
Like, that's something we actually know and fear.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And another thing, even if you don't end up getting a whole chunk of money, you should still be tracking your time and doing your hours as if you are. Because you need to have the tangible data of just how much money you're theoretically spending on things, because it helps it make business decisions so much easier.
250G.
Yeah, so basically, if we had paid ourselves a normal living wage and everything else we've spent on the company, the product, it would have been $250,000. Like, that's a lot of money. We probably won't make that back, but that's fine, because we work for free and we're all completely okay with that. But yeah, like...
It's not until you put it into perspective like this is how much, if we were paying ourselves, if we were paying for events and that sort of thing, this is how much money we would have spent.
Yeah.
And this is how much money we got from funding. Yeah. Like, look at those two figures. Look at how drastically different they are. And just remember that.
Yeah.
Onwards?
Yeah. So yeah, just to start to wrap up, one of the things I can't stress enough is finding a good accountant and finding a good lawyer from day one. You will be very surprised about how much they charge an hourly rate. I think it's about $300 an hour, depending on who they are. And that's a lot of money when you're just paying it out of your personal savings account. But you need to get that sorted from day one. If we hadn't have done that, this situation where one of our artists left a couple of months into the project, like, if we hadn't have got all the forms set up so that we owned everything that they produced, like, then suddenly all this art that they had produced for the game would just have to have been removed. And like, that would have been all right maybe 2 months in, but you don't want that to happen like 2 weeks before release or something like that. So this is all like those sort of real contracty stuff that you have to work out. Contracts are real, they're not just like that terms and conditions thing you tick at the end of a form.
Or like for the Wi-Fi here, yes, I agree, and I will take your internet.
Yeah.
And don't read anything about how they're going to track everything that you do and probably like follow you home.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
And this includes like reaching out to external contractors. Like for the most part, you're not going to have every skill in your team. So you're going to have to reach out to sound people or additional artists or graphic designers or whatever. And you need to actually don't just rely on handshake deals where you're like, yeah, we need this from you by this date and this is how much money we'll give you. Because you don't want to get to the stage where it's 2 weeks out from a convention. They're like, oh, okay, we'll give it to you. But actually, I think maybe I was worth twice as much as I quoted you originally. And now you're like you've got nothing to fall back on in that sort of situation. And we've had that happen.
Yeah, we've been there.
Yeah, you don't want to be there, trust me.
Get those contracts.
Yeah, it's just...
Get a lawyer.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff.
Really important.
Yeah.
Because we thought we thought like business is this, GIF. It's not. It would be amazing if it were though, right? But yes, make sure like that top point is really, really important. Do it. Like even if it comes out of your own pocket, like it did for us, I think we would have been up shit creek if we hadn't have done that. Yep. If we hadn't put those systems in place early and been like, yeah, just do it. Just do it. This is my really awesome, totally legit graph of our happiness scale from the start of the company to like now. I did study psych, so I know how to do these things, and it shows. So copyright law of Voss 2016, thank you. Basically, our happiness was at 100 when we started the company, and we're like, yeah, company, like we have a logo, we have an ABN, man, like this is real. And then, a few months in, started to realize this is actually really hard, and there's a lot of stuff that we don't know how to do, and we hit kind of like rock bottom in this period, and they were rough days, rough days. And then we found out about Film Vic funding, and we're like, hope, there it is. And so we started to like work towards that. We submitted our application after many, many revisements. I'll never forget sending it to some people in the arcade, and we checked the Google Doc the next day, and because they looked at it at like 12 o'clock at night and stuff, because developers, and it was like highlighted, comment, highlighted, comment, and Joe and I were just like, oh my God, we're shit. We are terrible. And so we revised it and got this really great document that we're really happy with. So we submitted that with a build of our game, and then we waited, and then we heard back, and they were like, you've got an interview, and we're like, we've got an interview. Shit, like, what do we do? Yeah. And so then, we went through that scary process of having our interview, and I kid you not, it was like it was a table that was literally this stage,
yep.
And just Joe and I on one side, and like 6 important people on the other side, but like there was so much space between each person, and then Joe and I were like, from me and this sign away, and
Laura,
we're like...
We're probably about this far away from each other?
Yeah.
They isolate you pretty well.
I kind of like shuffled the chair over a little bit because I was like, I feel really far away from Joe, like support. Yeah. It went well. It went so well that we got funding. And so that's why it peaks again. Extreme happiness. But then we were like, crap, now we have to budget this money. This means this is real. What do we do? How do we do it? So it starts to decrease again. And then around this period is like you're preparing for like this, GCAP, you're preparing for PAX, you're preparing for like all these events that you have to attend, and it starts to get really stressful and you hit that rock bottom again. You're like, what am I doing? Like imposter syndrome stuff, and you're like, I shouldn't be doing this. Like, what am I doing here right now in front of you guys? And then you were like, but Melbourne Games Week. This is awesome. This is exciting. Like, we get to go to things and talk to people about shit. And so then it's like back up at 100, and it's awesome. So this has been our development time over the last 9 months now. It's been a roller coaster, as the cliche goes. But seriously, and it's totally worth it. I mean, even the moments when you feel exactly like this GIF, even when you hit that zero happiness in the graph, just remember that you're working towards something that you love, you're doing what you want to be doing, and at the end, trust me, it is worth it. It's the best.
Yeah.
So, thanks for listening to us say stuff. And I'm clapping myself.